How many times have you been in a conversation, a really high stakes meeting, maybe a first interview, or even just a tense discussion with a partner, and a silence just drops? It's
Mm.
like a vacuum. And you feel this primal urge to just restore the balance, right? So you rush in, you're desperate to fill that space.
And you immediately regret it.
Instantly, you hear the words tumbling out, maybe your voice goes up a half octave, and suddenly any power you thought you had just evaporates.
Well, that phenomenon it's a completely universal human impulse.
Mm.
We're neurologically wired to be uncomfortable with those informational voids, those conversational pauses.
So it's not just me being awkward.
Not at all.
Mm.
Most of us are conditioned to see silence as a failure, a passive thing, a loss of momentum or worse, social incompetence.
Mm.
But if we're going to dive deep into true influence today, we have to fundamentally shift that perception. Silence is not an absence. It is, as poets and strategists would argue, an active decision. I love this quote from the filmmaker Alberto Cavalcanti. He said, "Silence can be the loudest of noises, just as black in a brilliant design can be the brightest of colors."
That perfectly captures what we're doing here. This is our mission for this deep dive.
Yeah.
We're getting into the most misunderstood communication tool in the entire executive toolbox: strategic silence.
Right.
We're moving way beyond the simple just listen more advice and really analyzing restraint as an active, potent instrument of influence and self-mastery.
Precisely. We are synthesizing a massive stack of sources today. We've got hard data from strategic business coaching, insights from a systematic review of over 100 social psychology texts on influence, and real-world analyses of high-stakes negotiations.
So we're covering all the bases.
We are. And our goal is to give you the playbook for wielding restraint, to show how by consciously deciding to say less, you actually increase your perceived authority.
We're going to explore that core paradox then. How to turn silence from this passive void into a strategic weapon. We'll look at its tactical use in high-stakes environments, its link to charisma, and this is important, the profound psychological impact it has.
Both for the person who wields it and the person who is subjected to it.
Yes. And the first step toward mastering this rule of command, it seems, is realizing that people judge your capability the second you arrive, often before you've said a single word.
Exactly. The first step is to really analyze the architecture of authority that silence helps to build.
Okay, so let's unpack that. The psychological reality of first impressions, because I think they're more ruthless than most people realize.
Yeah.
We all talk about the 7-second rule, right? This idea, you've got this little window to make a good impression.
Right. But the research shows that window is shrinking exponentially.
Really?
Oh, yeah. The speed is shocking. Studies in social cognition show the human brain makes these surprisingly detailed and often accurate judgments about a total stranger in fractions of a second.
How fast are we talking?
We're talking 100 milliseconds, the blink of an eye. The phenomenon is known scientifically as thin slicing.
Thin slicing.
Yeah, the brain takes just a minimal amount of information, a thin slice, and from that, it extrapolates a whole personality profile.
And crucially, that quick snapshot, it establishes these incredibly durable judgments. Once that's established, psychology tells us those judgments are just so resistant to change.
That's the primacy effect at work.
Right. The first information you get acts like a filter. So if your first impression screams competence, a mistake you make later might get excused, as a one-off.
An anomaly.
Uh-huh.
But if you project uncertainty right out of the gate, even a brilliant insight you have later on gets discounted. The audience has already stamped you with a label, and that label is hard to peel off.
What's astonishing to me from the research is that the audio isn't even necessary for a lot of these key judgments.
That's the most amazing part of the thin slice methodology. Studies show observers can accurately judge these huge traits, competence, dominance, trustworthiness, politeness, from silent video clips. Completely silent. Some as short as 6 seconds. Your nonverbal behavior, how you hold yourself, your stillness, the pace of your movement, that's doing almost all of the heavy lifting.
So this is where strategic silence comes in, right at the beginning, to stabilize that first impression. We learned that detecting social status depends more on the static frame of your arrival than your fluid motion.
Think about that.
The moment you walk into a room and you find your spot and you stand still, That static frame is critical. If you rush, if you apologize for being there, if you immediately start talking to justify your presence.
You dilute that powerful silent moment. You look like you're trying too hard to occupy the space you're in.
Which means we have to focus on cultivating vocal authority so that when you do decide to speak, your words land with weight. Gravitas, that's the word, that calm confidence.
And it's signaled heavily by 3 vocal cues. The first and the most immediate one is pitch control. We all know intuitively that a lower pitch signals authority and credibility.
But let's get into the mechanics of that, because it's not about putting on some fake deep voice.
No, absolutely not. This is about managing stress. When you're nervous, stress hormones, they tighten your vocal cords, and that pushes your natural speaking pitch higher.
That's that breathless high register sound that just screams anxiety.
Exactly. The solution is physiological. You have to anchor your voice by breathing from your diaphragm and speaking from your chest cavity. Diaphragmatic breathing activates the vagus nerve, which runs from your brainstem down to your abdomen.
And that promotes the calming effect, right? The parasympathetic response.
Precisely. That internal calm prevents the physical tightening that causes your pitch to go up. By breathing deep and speaking from that anchored place, you are physically projecting composure before you've even structured a single thought.
Okay, so pitch is one. Next is the pace of your delivery. Rush speech is just the sound of anxiety. It suggests you're trying to dump information quickly before someone cuts you off or before you lose your nerve.
It signals to the audience that your time is more valuable than their time to actually absorb the information.
So what's the standard?
The executive standard, according to communication coaching analysis, is speaking about 20% slower than your average conversational speed. For your key points, the best leaders aim for around 130 to 150 words per minute.
That's surprisingly slow.
It feels slow to the speaker, but it's a projection of value. They aren't slow thinkers. They trust that every single word they say is valuable enough for the audience to absorb it fully. They're giving the content and you, the listener, the respective time.
And that brings us to the strategic pause. You called it the most criminally underused tool in communication.
It is. If you are delivering your absolute core message, your key recommendation, you must deliberately pause for 2 to 3 full seconds beforehand.
We have to be specific here because to the speaker, 3 seconds feels like an eternity. Your brain is just screaming at you. They're judging me. Say something, anything.
Right. But the audience processes that pause completely differently. To them, it's a frame. It signals that what's coming next is the most important thing you're going to say. It gives their cognitive load a moment to reset, and it directs their full attention to your statement.
It turns a data point into the main event.
That's the singular critical takeaway. And the difference between a strategic pause and just, stuttering or using a verbal filler is the intention behind it. And that intention is only visible when you, the speaker, maintain complete stillness and eye contact during that silence.
So you're building all this from the inside out. I remember reading a case study from a coaching firm. There was this mid-level manager presenting a huge operational overhaul.
Okay.
And she spoke quickly. She used all the fillers, and just rushed through the cost-benefit analysis. The proposal was tabled.
Of course.
6 months later, same data, she presented again. But this time she walked in deliberately. She was breathing from her diaphragm. She slowed her pace. And she paused for 3 full counts before stating the final projected ROI.
And the proposal was approved.
Immediately. The numbers didn't change at all. The projection of authority did.
And that successful projection, that leads us directly into the principle of scarcity, which reinforces why saying less is almost always better.
Right. This is built on the scarcity heuristic. It's a cognitive bias. Our brain just automatically assumes that if something is rare, it must have a higher status or quality or value. Rarity implies desirability.
This was demonstrated so brilliantly in that 1975 landmark cookie experiment.
Oh, I love this one.
Researchers had participants rate cookies. One group was given cookies from a jar that was almost empty, only 2 left. The second group got the exact same cookies, but from a full jar with 10 in it.
Yeah.
The participants rated the cookies from the almost empty jar as significantly more desirable, even though they were identical. The perception of scarcity completely elevated the perceived value.
That is the perfect analogy for communication in a professional setting. When an individual's words are carefully rationed, when their time and their verbal output is limited, those few words are assigned a much higher market value by everyone listening.
You are no longer the full jar of common cookies.
You become the almost empty jar. Your contributions become anticipated, they're respected, and they're weighed so much more heavily.
And this is the core philosophy behind the strategic advice. Always say less than necessary. It's not just about withholding information. It's about ensuring that when you do speak, even a statement that might be kind of mundane is delivered with such restraint and gravitas.
That it seems, what, original, vague, open-ended, and sphinx-like?
Exactly. It creates an enigma. The listener can't fully pin you down, which increases your perceived control and your authority. By forcing others to interpret your limited output, you control the terms of their engagement with you.
So we've built this architecture of presence. Now let's apply this idea of strategic restraint to the arena where the stakes are highest.
Oh.
High-stakes negotiation and critical decision-making.
Right.
Most people think negotiation skills mean being a verbal wizard, persuading, countering, arguing, constantly pushing data. But that, ironically, is exactly why silence is such a lethal power move.
In any negotiation, intentional silence is the active creation of a conversational vacuum. The discomfort of that void is a powerful, almost chemical agent. Humans are neurologically predisposed to fill vacuums, and in a high-pressure exchange, that compulsion just gets amplified.
And that discomfort is your tactical advantage. By creating a silence after a critical statement, you shift the entire conversational weight onto your counterpart. You force them to guess your reaction, your thoughts, your next move.
And that instantly instigates this low-level anxiety that benefits you immensely.
And this anxiety, it drives the more talkative person to make these critical mistakes. First, they start to reveal hidden needs.
Yes. They often feel compelled to expand on their own position just to break the tension. And in doing so, they clarify their true priorities, their anxieties, their hidden constraints, things they never intended to share.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. Imagine you offer $100 for a service. Instead of accepting or rejecting, you just hold eye contact and remain completely silent.
Okay, I'm feeling uncomfortable just thinking about it.
Exactly. The anxious counterpart might jump in with, well, we could maybe throw in item B, but we really need this project done by Friday.
Ah, so you now know their real priority is time, and their negotiating margin is item B. And you didn't even have to ask a question.
And second, they make unforced concessions. This is the classic use of the pause. After a price or a key proposal is on the table, the rule is simple. The person who speaks first is immediately at a disadvantage.
So you just hold that vacuum.
You hold it. Even for an agonizing 10 seconds, you compel them to negotiate against themselves. They will often lower their demands or increase their offer just to break the tension they can't bear anymore.
This requires an incredible amount of self-control. It's about shifting from being reactive to being decisive.
That's the key. That micro pause, that intentional choice not to respond instantly, it gives your own judgment time to improve. You catch yourself before you agree to a bad term, before you reveal your own limits, or before you let adrenaline make your decision for you. Silence becomes a quality control mechanism.
Let me play devil's advocate here for a second, because this feels like a common trap. If I stay silent and I hold that vacuum, don't I risk looking disengaged? Or even worse, missing my chance to contribute at all?
That is a critical distinction.
Yeah.
The difference between strategic silence and just being absent is the quality of your attention.
Okay.
Strategic silence is highly focused listening.
Yeah.
You're tracking their nonverbal cues, you're internalizing their expanded points, and you're using the pause to formulate a measured, non-reactive response. Absence is just distraction, disengagement.
So the follow-up matters.
It's everything. If you hold the pause and then come back with some shallow comment, the whole strategy collapses. The goal is to make your eventual response feel earned, highly considered.
In this kind of mastery of restraint, it sounds like it's almost naturally inclined toward introverts. We should probably dig into what we call the quiet mastery that introversion can cultivate.
Absolutely. Introversion, when you define it psychologically, it's about lower scores on things like gregariousness and sociability. And that naturally fosters an aura of mystery.
Because the true introvert isn't constantly broadcasting their thoughts on every platform.
Right. So their presence and their time become scarce commodities.
And there's that scarcity principle again. When a person's verbal output and their availability are rationed, they are perceived as more valuable. People naturally start to seek them out more. They see their input as a prize.
It compels others to work harder, to initiate the conversation, to seek out the introvert's opinion, to get the attention that an extrovert might just give away freely.
So there are different types of charisma.
Exactly. Extrovert charisma is about pushing energy out, being the shiny object in the room, highly available, magnetic because of sheer energetic presence.
And introvert charisma.
It's about drawing energy in. It's chill, it's grounded, and it's magnetic in one-on-one or smaller, deeper settings.
And introverts do this by naturally using silence to hold those conversational vacuums. By sitting back and not jumping in on every point, they compel the other person to talk more, to open up.
And that strategic non-action is the foundation of powerful listening, which in turn is the foundational trait of high-level influence. When people feel truly heard, they trust and respect the listener implicitly.
Okay, so let's scale this up. From the individual to the macro level. We see this as a non-negotiable part of political strategy.
A hallmark of it. Speaking less allows a leader to dictate the terms of the conversation and maintain absolute control over how they are perceived, especially in a crisis or under intense scrutiny.
The most immediate practical benefit is just as a shield against mistakes, the gaffe defense.
Yes. In modern politics, every single statement, every off-the-cuff remark can be instantly digitized, clipped, and weaponized by your opponents. Silence minimizes the risk of giving them that ammunition. It's the ultimate defense against a reactive error.
And we see this in the use of strategic ambiguity. We can look at the communication style of, say, Russian President Vladimir Putin, who is often cited for his carefully measured and highly restricted public statements.
He very rarely engages in off-script dialogue or long Q&A sessions. That restraint maintains an aura of unpredictability, and it enhances his leverage on the global stage. When his messages are infrequent, the world hangs on every single word because the output is so scarce.
Or you can consider U.S. political strategy during a high-stakes election. During the 2020 election, Joe Biden's campaign used a very cautious communication strategy. They often limited his public appearances and stuck meticulously to teleprompter scripts in controlled environments.
That was a calculated silence. And it worked to his advantage by minimizing his risk exposure to controversial topics or potential verbal stumbles.
Right, while his opponent was dominating the news cycle with frequent, often controversial remarks.
Biden's communication strategy projected a steady, composed, and stable image. The politics of silence here isn't about being voiceless. It's about exercising extreme control over your voice. It's ensuring that every time you contribute, you are shaping the narrative on your own terms, not just reacting to the terms set by the opposition.
It's the difference between being an information source and being a strategic gatekeeper.
Precisely.
We've established how to use silence to project dominance and control, but here's where it gets really interesting, the strategic turn. True, lasting influence, what we'd call high-level charisma, it requires connection, not just command. If you appear too perfect, you activate this new kind of social friction that can silently sabotage your power.
That friction is envy. And it is a corrosive force that creates silent enemies who will work against you, sometimes subconsciously. It's a psychological pull that's so primal that people can't help but resent someone who appears to have no faults or weaknesses at all.
So appearing better than others is dangerous. But appearing utterly flawless is the most dangerous posture of all.
It is. The strategic mastery here is to use what we call strategic humanity, a calculated display of some harmless defect to deflect that envy. It allows the high-status person to seem approachable, human.
You'd admit to harmless vices, or you display defects that just soften the hard edge of your dominance.
This is the powerful tool of strategic vulnerability. Let's say you have a brilliantly successful executive who is just intimidatingly articulate. They have to puncture their own intimidation factor.
So what do?
They might open a presentation by joking about their embarrassing lack of technical skill in setting up the projector. Or they'll share a story about getting horribly lost driving to the client's office. The key is the target of the self-deprecation.
And this is the subtle but crucial part of the strategy, isn't it? You only joke about failures that do not undermine your core competence.
Exactly. The mathematician can laugh about their terrible singing, but they can't laugh about getting a core calculation wrong.
The celebrated novelist can joke about being unable to change a light bulb, but never about poor prose or a lack of imagination.
The psychological payoff is enormous.
Yeah.
Perfection creates distance and resentment. Imperfection creates connection and relatability. It makes high intelligence, high status, high competence, all of it, less threatening because the listener is given a safe anchor to your humanity. You become relatable, not alien.
So from self-deprecation, we move to external generosity. Truly charismatic leaders understand this unspoken rule of making others feel smarter in their presence.
This builds immense credibility because it shows a leader who is secure enough in their own status that they don't need to hoard all the credit.
And they do this by giving very specific credit. They don't just offer a generic, "that was a good idea."
No, they offer detailed contextual praise. Things like, The way you connected those two disparate concepts is really clever, or the metaphor you just used actually helps me understand the system better than the manual ever did. That kind of specific praise makes people feel profoundly seen, valued, and intellectually validated.
What's really happening there is that these leaders are positioning themselves not as lone geniuses, but as nodes in a network of intelligence.
Yes, they're modeling the worldview that intelligence is abundant, not some zero-sum scarce resource. And what's deeply compelling is that they often model intellectual humility as a form of confidence. They get visibly excited about not knowing something.
They treat new information like a gift.
Exactly, and they actively solicit opposing viewpoints.
Hmm.
They're modeling that real intelligence is about perpetual curiosity and asking better questions, not about having all the answers.
And this brings us full circle, back to achieving that lasting executive presence, the kind that's built from the inside out. So much of the common advice is about adopting external postures or using specific buzzwords.
Which creates a thin, artificial veneer that just inevitably cracks under real pressure.
So what's the foundation?
The foundational, non-negotiable step for authentic presence is content mastery. True confidence simply cannot be projected if you don't know your material cold.
If you hesitate because you're unsure of a number or you can't answer a second-tier question about your own topic, that lack of preparation is going to manifest as weakness.
The hard truth is that most problems people perceive as presence problems, the rushing, the high pitch, the anxiety, they are fundamentally preparation problems.
So once that internal competence is locked down, you need to make sure the external signal matches that internal state.
And that requires rehearsing your moment of entry until it is second nature. There's a highly effective technique used in executive coaching called the 5-second stand.
The 5-second stand.
You rehearse walking into the room, approaching your speaking position, and then standing in complete silence for a full 5 seconds before you allow a single word to escape your mouth.
And that eliminates all the nervous apologies,
Yeah.
the self-conscious fiddling with your clothes or the equipment, the rush to justify your existence.
That 5 seconds is where you earn the right to be heard before you even open your mouth. It signals patience, readiness, and total command of the space and the moment. It's the moment where strategic silence completes the architecture of authority.
It's so clear that deliberate speaking, just saying less, is a powerful strategic tool. But if we know this intellectually, why do we constantly sabotage ourselves by talking so much, rushing in with the wrong words at the wrong time?
Well, the answer lies inward. We have to look at the root causes of our internal noise. The answer is in what behavioral psychologists and executive coaches call internal thinking saboteurs. These are mental patterns or internal critics that hijack our rational response system.
They compel impulsive speech.
Exactly. They diminish our presence and they systematically undermine our effectiveness. They are automatic, stress-driven reactions that distort our perception of what a good or necessary response is in a critical situation.
So understanding these saboteurs is the prerequisite for moving to deliberate strategic speaking. We need to detail a few of the most common ones because recognizing them in yourself is the only way to break that pattern of unnecessary noise and verbal impulsivity.
Let's start with the classic, the hyperachiever.
Okay, the hyperachiever.
The hyperachiever is driven by a deep, relentless need for external recognition, status, and validation of their competence. This compulsion makes them speak frequently, often dominating discussions, not because they have the best idea, but because they need to prove their intelligence to themselves and to everyone in the room.
And the counterproductive result is that they just seem self-centered, overbearing, and they risk overshadowing their entire team. The hyperachiever's noise is just screaming, "Look how smart I am."
Right, and the counter strategy here is radical restraint. Silence, for them, conveys confidence in their established achievements, and crucially, it demonstrates trust in the team's ability to contribute. You're signaling that your competence is so undeniable, you don't need to constantly restate it.
Okay, what's next?
Next, we have the controller. The saboteur is driven by an intense desire to maintain order, compliance, and power. This leads them to dominate conversations, interrupt, and pathologically over-explain every single process and decision to ensure others stay in line.
So their speaking is basically an act of micromanagement. The controller's noise signals, "I don't trust you to get this right unless I spell out every single detail for you."
And this reactive speaking just stifles autonomy. It crushes creativity, and it prevents any real ownership by the team. The antidote is the strategic use of silence to actively solicit input, which demonstrates trust and fosters a truly collaborative and empowering environment.
A third major one is the restless.
Yes, this person is just profoundly uncomfortable with stillness or what they perceive as inactivity. They talk constantly, frequently changing topics or filling any conversational lull because they fear that silence signals inefficiency, a lack of progress, or even a lack of leadership drive. They talk to prove they're busy or productive.
So the restless person's noise projects an image that is scattered, unfocused, and lacking in any strategic depth.
For them, silence is a necessary discipline. It forces a pause for deeper, more strategic reflection. It demands that they shift from just tactical chatter to fundamental strategic thinking, which leads to far more considered and effective decisions instead of just rapid-fire activity.
And finally, a really common one that I think leads to career stagnation, the pleaser.
Highly common. The pleaser is fundamentally driven by the need to be accepted, liked, and validated by everyone around them. This compels them to speak frequently, often agreeing excessively, volunteering for unwanted tasks, or interjecting compliments just to gain favor and avoid upsetting anyone.
And the pleaser's noise just dilutes their presence and their authority. Their speaking seems driven by this persistent need for external validation, rather than any effective leadership or genuine insight.
The counter strategy for the pleaser is silence used as a form of composure and assertiveness. Silence here conveys strength, boundary setting, and a quiet confidence that doesn't require constant applause or approval.
So if we recognize these drivers of impulsive speech in ourselves, how do we move toward deliberate speaking?
It requires implementing a rigorous quality control mechanism, one that you have to apply before the words ever leave your mouth. You must introduce friction between the impulse and the action.
So you're saying we need to install a set of self-assessment criteria, a mental framework for strategic restraint. This is the moment you interrupt the saboteur and you regain control.
That's right. The first question you must ask is, what am I hoping to achieve by speaking right now? But the obvious answer is never enough. You have to ask the key follow-up. What else? Are you informing, clarifying, challenging, or are you just soothing your own anxiety? You have to dig past the surface reason to find the hidden driver.
The second question is about motive. Is my need to speak driven by a fear, like the restless, another subtle need, like the hyperachiever, or simply a desire to be heard? You have to identify the underlying saboteur because you can't defeat what you can't name.
Third, how is my speaking impacting my presence, authority, and credibility? Are these words adding value proportional to the airtime they consume? Are they reinforcing the careful architecture of authority we've been building, or are they undermining my perceived competence?
Fourth, how is my speaking impacting the others in this circumstance? Am I stifling the input of a quieter team member? Am I consuming the last valuable moments of a meeting? Is my contribution enabling collaboration, or is it just dominating?
And finally, the most direct, critical question of all. How necessary, critical, important, or urgent is it for me to talk right now? Wait, can I capture this thought in a follow-up email? Could someone else make this point better than I can?
By applying this systematic analysis in that microsecond before you speak, silence becomes an active quality control mechanism. It prevents the reactive mistake, the ill-considered agreement, and the self-sabotaging impulse that's driven by fear.
It ensures that your conversations transition from these superficial, self-driven exchanges to meaningful dialogues, which leads to better outcomes you can actually stand by later. We have spent a lot of time exploring silence as a choice, as a strategic tool of self-mastery and empowerment. But it is absolutely vital for a comprehensive deep dive to pivot now and discuss the necessary distinction. The dark side of silence,
Right.
where it is imposed, not chosen, and it functions as a marker of powerlessness, systemic oppression, and internalized harm.
We have to recognize that the ability to consciously and strategically wield silence is, in many ways, a privilege of status. For so many individuals, particularly those in marginalized positions, whether it's due to identity or position or structural inequality, silence is often imposed by their environment,
Yeah.
or adopted as a harmful survival strategy.
When silence is imposed, it acts as a mechanism of control. Research in organizational psychology shows how people who anticipate being judged harshly based on their identity, like women in heavily male-dominated fields or minorities in predominantly white settings, they often self-censor.
It's a way to avoid conflict, or more judgment, or even career retaliation.
And that absence of voice is not strategic at all. It's internalized oppression that reinforces structural inequality because the full scope of talent and concern just remains unheard.
The consequences of this imposed silence, or equally damaging, the silence of neglect and indifference, are severe. When an executive strategic pause is calculated to instigate anxiety, okay, it might work. But when silence signifies a lack of attention or judgment or disengagement from a powerful person, it has devastating effects on the recipient.
That indifference creates profound feelings of loneliness and diminished self-worth. Studies link social exclusion and chronic professional silencing to measurable stress. It can manifest in psychosomatic symptoms, chronic headaches, severe sleep disturbances, heightened rates of depression and anxiety.
The body processes being ignored as a threat to its survival.
It does. This specific phenomenon is called self-silencing, the withdrawal from openly expressing concerns, needs, or unique perspectives because of a fear of prejudice or an anticipated negative judgment.
For marginalized employees, this self-silencing leads to lower job satisfaction and reduced creativity because they can't bring their full, authentic selves to the table. They have to prioritize safety over contribution, and that severely damages their mental health and their career trajectory.
The structural reality dictates who is heard and who is silenced. Think about professional settings. The executive holds the power to dictate who speaks and who remains silent just by structuring the meeting, setting the agenda, or simply controlling the interruption dynamics. For some, silence is not a tool. It is a barrier marked by shyness, fear, embarrassment, or internalized shame.
So an effective leader has to be highly attuned to the source of the silence in the room. Is it strategic composure or is it fear?
That's the question.
Now, let's look at the flip side of this, the chatty person we talked about earlier, the person who feels compelled to fill every single void. Surprisingly, social psychology research shows that their extreme aversion to awkward silences often stems from deep empathy, not just an impulse to dominate.
That is a crucial distinction. These individuals are often highly sensitive to the emotional energy in the room. They act like emotional seismographs.
They absorb the waves of discomfort.
They do. Whether that pause is caused by strategic silence or just general tension, their nervous fidgeting and their urge to fill the void are often not selfish acts at all. They are their empathy screaming out, compelling them to restore harmony and alleviate the perceived discomfort of others. They are trying to rescue the room.
Which creates a fundamental tension for the strategic commander we've been describing. When you hold your intentional, powerful 5-second pause, you have to be aware that this calculated act of dominance might trigger severe, empathy-driven anxiety in a highly sensitive or insecure counterpart.
So a truly effective leader needs to read the room not just for signs of weakness, but for signs of distress, and maybe adjust the duration or the intensity of their silence accordingly.
So the overarching conclusion from all this, from synthesizing social psychology and executive strategy, is that silence is this multidimensional construct.
It operates as a psycholinguistic space for advanced thought. It serves a crucial sociocultural function in setting norms. It can be an empowering tool for resistance and negotiation, and yet at the same time, it can be a devastating sign of powerlessness, marginalization, or trauma.
Mastery requires recognizing the context and the potential for harm if strategic silence is misapplied or imposed without empathy.
We must wield this power with acute awareness. Ultimately, the mastery we've discussed today, it really boils down to one simple, profound realization. It is the power of choice. It's choosing reflection, that vital interpersonal resource over reactivity. By reconceptualizing silence not as a break in communication, but as an active and productive state of participation.
You move beyond just trying to be seen or heard.
And toward establishing a presence that is undeniably respected and thoroughly understood.
We've spent this deep dive unlocking the hidden laws of presence by focusing on the power of withholding. And we learned that adage that guides this strategy. A fish with a closed mouth never gets caught. Which implies that strategically holding back your plans, your intentions, your vulnerabilities, it prevents them from being sabotaged by the external forces of cynicism or even the internal erosion of self-doubt. So, here is the provocative thought. The critical application I want to leave you with, the unspoken truth of command. What foundational achievement, what critical next phase in your personal or professional life, maybe it's a massive career pivot, a deep relationship boundary, or a long-term goal, what are you currently jeopardizing simply because you haven't yet mastered the strategic silence required to protect it? Since we've just spent all this time absorbing these hidden laws of influence, the final rule is that you can't leave this deep dive without creating a silent mark. If you've decided that strategic restraint is your next mastery move, you don't need to tell us. We want you to show us. Give us the unspoken signal of support that commands our attention by hitting that like button right now. The secret handshake among those who understand the power of the nonverbal is leaving a comment below, detailing your nonverbal takeaway from this discussion. A single emoji, a keyword you won't utter aloud, or maybe just a meaningful pause. And the ultimate loyalty move that proves you are ready to command the room with consistent, quiet influence. That's subscribing and ringing that bell so you never miss another deep dive. Don't speak, just click. We'll be here waiting quietly for you to join us next time.